Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to call to order the California First Responder Network Board. And Sue, if you could do the roll call.
Sure. Good morning. Paul Troxel.
Present.
Barry Frazier.
Here.
Craig Johnson.
Here.
Cynthia Gomez. Heather Hostler. Chief Kevin Guerrero.
Here.
Chief Scott Holland.
Here.
Pat Mullen.
Here.
Chief McCann. Tom Bruce. Ferdinand Manelis.
Here on the phone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chief Charnick.
Here.
And Adelina Sahinda.
Here.
Thank you. Everybody's.
Okay, so we'll move forward. The first item on the agenda is I'd like to introduce a couple of FirstNet staff that are with us today. We have Natalie Romanoff, did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes.
And Claire Gallagher. And so they've been here to take a look at our SLIGP grant process and how we're doing, and we got the thumbs up, we're doing well. So it's all good. And I'm glad we did this today so you could attend our board meeting.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we will also have Keone on the phone, who is our district rep for FirstNet, and he was at our last meeting as well. Are you on the phone, Keone? Well, he will be. He'll be soon. So we're just going to go ahead and get started. First thing is the approval of the May 2015 minutes. I know we've had a couple of meetings in between that, but they were more working meetings and not formal meetings to prepare for our state consultation process. So if everybody had a chance to review the minutes, and if you have any changes or corrections.
Move to approve.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, minutes approved as written. So I'd like to go over a few things that we've been doing and getting everybody kind of caught up. Since we had our state consultation, we've been working toward getting all of our data collection process completed. And later on in the meeting, Steve Garber will go through the details of that. But one of the good things that we did here is that we had the most responses to the survey. It was lacking just a bit. I think we got around 3,000 responses to the survey, or 300. Which was it?
Almost 400.
Almost 400. I was overstating that quite a bit. Almost 400, and those can still come in, so we want to, if you guys can encourage your stakeholders to continue to fill those out. So what we did is we were able to extrapolate the data that we had to fill in the blanks. So we were able to give California a good representation of what our coverage needs are as a result of the survey, and Steve will go into the details. In addition, we had our cybersecurity comments that were due, so we were able to get those. We had a good response from everyone to get those through. We also worked with our cyber person at our Cal OES headquarters, so I felt like we did a really good job on that. I'm hoping it's the first of many for cybersecurity. I think cybersecurity is going to be one of our biggest issues with the FirstNet, so I hope this is one of many. I'm hopeful they have learned quite a bit from all the states that submitted. There were about 40 submissions, both from the industries and the states. I would hope that in the future, the rest of the states, all the states would provide comments, so I'm hoping this will be one of many comments that we'll be able to do. In the September meeting, FirstNet September meeting, it was a pivotal meeting because they actually defined rural. And I don't have that data here with me, but what we're doing is analyzing that to figure out what that means to California. When I read through that, I didn't feel like it was good for California based on how our rural population is spread out through the state. So we're doing the analysis, and in the next couple of weeks we will get this information to all of our members, and then please disperse it through your stakeholders, because I think we are impacted by that. And in fact, if Romy or Matt, if one of you guys could find that information prior to the end of the meeting, we can pass it out to everyone. Okay. It's just I just think it's going to impact rural California. And what we've talked about several times in these meetings, our biggest challenge in California is going to be the rural population. We know the larger metropolitan areas will be covered. It's population-based. So that, I think, is going to be a huge issue for us. So as soon as we do a good analysis of what this means, get it out to all of you, get it out to all your stakeholders, and then we can provide some comments back. But I do believe it's already done. What they have agreed on rural is what rural is going to be. And we've provided comments through all the processes of the importance of rural in California. So they've had all of our comments, they've had all of our concerns. The other thing that we did recently is on November 19th, we worked with Oregon, and because out-of-state travel is always a challenge, Oregon was able to come to California, and we hosted a meeting regarding the programmatic environmental impact statements, which is the process that FirstNet will be using to start building infrastructure in all the states. California is unique for many reasons, but we do have to follow the CEQA process as well as the national, the NEPA process. So there was a lot of good dialogue. The meeting was information gathering. It was really the first of many meetings that have to happen with all the states. We had Alaska participate through the webinar. Colorado? I'm not reading my notes, obviously.
That's okay. We had Washington, Alaska, Arizona, and there was some people throughout California that were also involved on the WebEx.
Yeah, we included our Office of Historic Preservation only because of what we learned through LA Ricks. And I think, Pat, you were probably a main player in that meeting.
He was very, very helpful.
Because a lot of LA Ricks' lessons learned is what needs to be watched as we build this nationwide network out. There's been a lot of challenges. So did you have any other comments from the meeting?
No.
You don't have to.
I think the one thing that was picked up, and I noted it in your notes here, is that the LA Ricks Authority, Joint Powers Authority, used accounting mode, and it doesn't get around CEQA, but it does help with the local permitting process. And so my recommendation was for FirstNet would be to look at a California mode, because there's intergovernmental immunity. So if you say we want to build in an independent city, and they decide that, you know, in addition to putting up an installation, they want you to build a park for them as a condition of their permitting process, then you can invoke the county's intergovernmental immunity, or this situation, the state's intergovernmental immunity, to say, no, we don't have to build you a park, we don't have to build you a freeway off-ramp, we have to comply with the California's building codes, we do, therefore we're immune from your local process. That works unless you're using property that's owned by them, and then they can say, well, unless you use my rules, you don't get to use the property at all.
Right. And I believe it'll be a while before there's a shovel in the ground to build anything, but we want to work all the issues out in advance, so as we proceed forward, there's no surprises.
Yeah, the other thing that was pointed out at that meeting that we've also experienced was that even though the county might have intergovernmental immunity, the state might have intergovernmental immunity, it doesn't have immunity over the Coastal Commission. And the Coastal Commission are very interesting folks. You know, they don't want anything built within 10 miles of the beach. And so that pretty much, and that's where, you know, particularly in some of the more urban areas, you have a tremendous influx of population, you know, during the summer months when the public safety services are needed the most, and that's when where you don't have really adequate coverage. So even to try to go to the roof of a lifeguard station, they have approval. To
Really?
go to an existing fire station within a certain distance from the coastline, they have jurisdiction. So that might be something that the state could, you know, from a public safety perspective, be able to weigh in, you know, through the governor's office to say, you know, in the interest of of the public good. You know, we're not trying to build a mansion on the beach and restrict people from getting to the water. We're trying to protect the people that are in the water. So,
Well, and as we look at the coverage objectives, I think we'll be able to make some determinations what's there and how much infrastructure will be needed to meet our objectives.
yeah.
And I think there will be some impact. And what I'm thinking of is the North Coast.
Sure, and then, you know, even in the waterways, you know, the cellular coverage needs to extend into the waterways because you've got the lifeguard, you've got Coast Guard, you know, lifeguard to pull somebody out of the water that needs to send, you know, telemetry because the person suffered a heart attack or something. You know, there does need to be coverage, you know, into the coastal waterways.
Wow. Good to know.
Experiences.
It's a good experience, Pat. So we will continue to have meetings as FirstNet wants to have them with us, and we will continue to participate with any other western state that would host a meeting, even if we are able to do it via a webinar or online, because this is going to be really, really important. We know there's not enough infrastructure in California, especially in our rural areas, so there will be some that will be built. And so we just want to make it as easy as possible for FirstNet to come in and build in California.
And Karen, I have a question. I was on the webcast of that meeting. Most of the time I had to go away for some other meetings. And I missed kind of the last piece of it. What were the next steps? Are they planning additional meetings? Or is there information that needs to be gathered? What was your sense of the next step for that?
So their next steps is, they're still going to hold some more meetings, kind of at that state level without the public first, throughout the other regions that they have. There's 5 regions they're going through, and they're not aligned with the FEMA regions. They're a little bit different because they grouped us with Idaho, I believe Idaho, Colorado, Alaska, Oregon, Washington, and that's a little different than our FEMA region.
Right, right.
And so after those are done, they hope to have a draft out sometime in the summer of 2016 that they'll give back to the states that we'll share with the board once we get that information. And the way that they're putting this whole PEIS together is by state, so it'll be really easy for us to go right to California and look at what our concerns have been, what our comments have been, and that's what they're gathering right now. And then they'll go out to the public, with the public, holding the public meeting. And we'll be informed on those prior to those happening in the state.
Great,
And they
thank you.
also have a website
Oh,
for
that's-
comments, their comments website, so anybody can go ahead and provide comments at any time. And they welcome all comments.
And I want to acknowledge Oregon, David Souls, who is the point of contact for Oregon. He's the one that spearheaded this meeting and gave us, Sue and I, a call and said, you know, this is what we want to do. Do you want to do it? And we said, well, absolutely. Let's do it here. And he said, absolutely. And so we were the first out of all the states to do this. Because on the western part of the United States, we have more rules, it seems like, and less people. So it was really important. So I do want to acknowledge that truly Oregon took the lead on this and brought us in, which I really appreciated. Okay, any other discussion on that? We're going to have our state government town hall on December 8th. So has everybody gotten the invite, and have you guys all pushed it out?
Yes.
And the university system, we feel is part of the state, so.
Yes.
Okay,
We appreciate that.
yes,
I think it would be helpful to push it out one more time.
okay, okay,
So with the fact that I've sent it up to the chief deputy directors of the resources agency departments. But again, another reminder would not be a bad idea for all state agencies.
yeah, and what we realized is, while we had completed several town halls throughout the state, we had not done anything that focused just on state government. And we have a lot of public safety, and we spread across the state through all of our agencies, and so it's really important to start bringing everybody in. I don't know how we missed it, honestly, but we did. And I want to thank Chief Guerrero, because he's the one that pointed it out as he was working with his agency, and realizing that we had not gotten to all the state agencies. So it's going to be really important. I want to make sure that we have good representation. And it did go out to the AIOs, I believe.
Actually, I think it went out to all CIOs. It
CIOs?
wasn't just the AIOs, which includes the AIOs to that list.
Oh, good.
But I'll confirm it, we can resend it also.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Because the department's CIOs should be really interested in getting involved in this. Okay. Has Keone joined us? Awesome. Okay, Keone, you're up.
Great. I don't have the slides on the WebEx, but I do have the slide deck in front of me, so if we could just, we'll step through it and give everybody sort of an overview of what we're going through in FirstNet right now. So it's, the first slide is up. These are excerpts from the SOC webinar that we had, single point of contact webinar we had on November 18th. Some of the information has been updated on the slides, and I'll speak to that, but essentially, these are the high, highest level sort of salient points for the board to understand in terms of our progress. So the first slide shows the data submission summary. We actually received data now by state. I think the absolute drop dead deadline was yesterday for, final data submissions or adaptations to the data. As maps were flying furiously back and forth to all the different states, and everybody had a chance to review what was going into the aggregated coverage objective map. So we have, 11,600 plus entities surveyed, 1.6 million personnel represented. It's a lot of data, and I think the state planning team and data teams have done a great job collecting it, and you guys did a fantastic job in submitting it and, being on point and speaking to sort of what Karen highlighted as her concerns for the rural areas in California and how we address those in phases. So the next slide takes us into our RFP sort of release schedule and implementation timeline. So the RFP is still on track to be released at the end of December before the new year. And all of the data elements and coverage objectives have been baked in at this point. We have a FirstNet board meeting in Houston next week, in Texas. The board will review the final draft of the RFP before it is, going out and give it their blessing, and then the RFP will be on the street. So we're really excited. It's such a key milestone in our progress to have completed this task, and been driving towards this with all initial consultations and the data collection. So it's going to be very good and kind of springboard us forward into 2016 in terms of the rest of the follow-up consultation and outreach activities, which I'll go through next. Does anybody have any questions about the RFP release or the timing?
Keone, this is Barry Fraser. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So according to the timeline here, you're kind of projecting that the proposals will be due sometime around May of 2016?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So what that essentially does is gives a 6-month window for clarification, question and answer periods, things like that, with the potential offerers, and so we can go through the whole source selection plan and get to their bids being due by June 1st or end of May or beginning of June. So that deadline, I don't really have it yet. I don't know what it's going to be, and it certainly can change with notice on the procurement. But we're giving ourselves a 6-month window there to get the bids in, qualify them, and then begin the review process in the second half of 2016. Ultimately leading to award. Yeah.
Keone, this is
Go ahead.
Karen. How is the RFP going to be released? How will everybody be able to find this?
It will be on the Federal Business Opportunities website, FedBizOps. Probably the primary location. It'll probably be released in the Federal Register as well, the invitation for bid. So those two areas where we publish most of our information is where people can go to find it or get information or put themselves on a contact list on Federal Business Opportunities to be notified if there's any changes or amendments to scope or any of the sections of the RFP.
When this gets released, will you guys send out a notice to all the SPOCs with where to find this through this process? Because
Absolutely.
I just want to make sure that everybody knows it's out there and has access to it, so we will then push it out here from California.
Yes. And anybody who's interested in seeing the public documentation is welcome to do that. If they register under the bid opportunity, they'll have the added ability to review information in the bidder's library that is not confidential information. It's public information that was released by the states for the vendors to analyze as they prepare their responses. So it's going to be a good wealth of information nationwide for where the different states are at in terms of their readiness for FirstNet. Okay, any other questions on that?
Okay.
Okay, so if we go to the next slide, we start talking about what the vision is for state consultation and outreach activities. And there are three primary areas we want to focus on in 2016. We want to expand our outreach and education with the states and territories, tribal, local, and public safety entities. Two, we want to obtain state and territory input to inform the state plans and network deployment policies, processes, procedures. And there are a number of defined elements in the template for the state plan that we continue to need input from the states on. And number three, preparing key decision makers as they're identified by the SPOCs and in the state for state plan delivery so everybody can see the draft in advance of it going to the governor's office and the governor making a decision. So the time frame for us to put a plan in front of the governor, we are looking at first quarter of 2017, early in the quarter, to get plans in front of the governor's office. That means that somewhere in late 2016, the SPOC and the local teams in the states will have a chance to review a draft plan before it goes up and make any comments or suggestions or add any nuances to the plan that are specific to California, for instance. So that there's no surprises for the governor when he receives the plan. The consultation will be sort of manifest in terms of us, FirstNet team coming out, meeting with stakeholders. There may be a large meeting again of stakeholders. There may be smaller breakout working groups to get input on the various elements of the plan, like local control and priority and preemption. What does public safety grade mean in California? Some of the cybersecurity concerns that Karen, that you brought up earlier, and just vetting all of those topics and getting the input from the state, the agencies, and the people who actually, operationally are using, data on their networks now, so we can bake it into the state plan and put the best plan forward that we can. Outreach will look like, we have prepared a number of talking points and informational sort of sessions that can be distributed for the town hall sort of activities and to other agencies or stakeholders, localities and counties and cities that might want information leading to adoption of or use of subscribing to FirstNet when the network becomes operational. So sort of long lead time documents to just get the message out and start to build up awareness of the project in advance of the network going live.
I just have one question. This is Karen. Do you have, or do you know when you have, just the framework of what the state plan might look like?
They have a rough outline now, but I don't think state plan team is going to release that until probably second quarter of 2016.
Oh, okay.
As they start to put the pieces together. So it'll be probably March, April timeframe before you guys see what the outline looks like.
Okay.
If you go to the next slide, the types of folks that we are looking at connecting with are all on this sort of like board here of PSAPs, FirstNet champions, key executives, decision makers, chief of staff, police chiefs, governor staff, any of the folks that would be an influencer to the governor in making the opt-in, opt-out decision ultimately when they receive the state plan. So we want to make sure that we have the buy-in, the input from all of these people that are interested in the service so that we can put, like you said, the best plan forward for the governor to review. That would be, if we had meetings with any of these folks, we would certainly run it through SPOC and the board and ensure that you guys know if we're going to go to a county or meeting or association meeting, that you guys know about it so we can coordinate it and, get some help and support in sort of carrying that message forward. Okay, the next slide.
Oh, wait, before you
is-
leave
is
this
there
slide,
questions?
before you leave this
Yeah.
slide, okay, this list that you have, when you think about California, is huge.
Right.
Huge. So, are you gonna come live in California County?
I know, I might have to, yeah.
So any help that you need, please let us know, because reaching all of these entities in California is going to be a huge challenge.
Yeah, I mean, we're only so many people. I mean, all of us included. I mean, your team, our team, and it's very small. And even the number of tribes in California is overwhelming.
Right.
For our one person that we have, working on tribes. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a sort of a team approach, and I think we'll also try to take, with the outreach materials, try to condense them so that they're really easy to get out and market and give people information in a very digestible fashion. So we can kind of train the trainer and distribute the information through the channels that you all have developed and continue to develop, so that it becomes easier for us to sort of have a pervasive presence in all of California, so they at least know what FirstNet is and that it's coming.
Right, and I want you to know that you will be able to leverage this board in helping reaching everyone, because it will be extremely difficult.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, and I would hope that we can, leverage Scott and Mitch and the chiefs and, fire and Caltrans and, DOT and Public Works arenas on their projects, so that everybody, we just, want to blast that message out there about FirstNet. I mean, it's really timely to do it now. I mean, we're 2 years out from the operational network, effectively, then in 2016, like 2018, right, sometime in 2018. Now's the time to really start talking to people about what it is and how it's going to work, and what the value proposition is for subscribing to using the services going forward. And it's a tool to make their jobs easier and make people safer, and provide a data network that can add a lot of value to emergency operations and first responders. So this list is not. Even though it's a big list in California, I mean, there are actually more people that are not listed here that we need to sort of get the message to.
All right.
Keone, it's Barry Frazier again. I want to just highlight that point. The boxes with city councils and mayors, county supervisors, those are, I think, going to be really important going forward, just because they're targets that really haven't been hit very, very much yet. I would also add city attorneys and county council, because they're going to be, they're the folks that the county supervisors and the mayors look to when you start talking about adding infrastructure to the rights of way or to anywhere within the city and county. And so the city attorneys and county councils are going to be key to that as well. Just wanted to add
Great.
those.
Thank you, Barry. Yeah, I think that's a really important point in California. I mean, the good thing about California is, even though it's so vast and so many folks, there's a lot of structure built, in how to communicate and deal with, governing bodies and councils, managers, mayors, supervisors, for the county, at the county level. So, and there are a lot of really high-profile projects in each of these areas that we can kind of align with to get the message through. So I think that's really a good point, Barry. Thank you. So in the background, we're sort of putting together as an internal document the sort of the strategy for the communications and outreach for each state, and that will develop over the course of the year. And in the next slide, you'll see sort of a timeline of what's the activities in 2016. And we intend to have another SPOC, a kickoff meeting, to really empower the SPOCs to communicate and help us with our messaging and get it out to the constituents. And just a lot of outreach and a lot of material dissemination and, messaging going out over the whole course of the year into 2017. The second line down is a statewide governance body meeting. So, I mean, California, we have the California First Responder Network Board. A lot of people have interoperability executive committees or boards, have E911, sort of boards and committees and other statutory committees, CIO councils, things like that. So anywhere there are sort of a governance body that affects, adoption of the FirstNet network or use or subscription. We want to include them and get in front of them and start to highlight how the system works and, how all the pieces fit together to work in California, and that they have, potentially a say in how it's used or how it's administered, for California's specific needs. So those governance body meetings will kind of begin to happen like they are now, like with this meeting, but, more board meetings and other, identifying other sort of larger bodies of appointed people that have the connections and the connective tissue into the organizations and agencies that will eventually subscribe to the service. The CTT is a consultation, like, task-oriented, like, sort of committee, and we'll be executing specific technical discussions with different groups related to elements of the state plan. So those would be things like, again, like I talked about earlier, the nationwide design, the core network, the network management, how does local control work, what does public safety mean, what are the cybersecurity constraints, what are the compatibility with CLETS and CGIS and all of these other elements, that need to be baked into the plan. Device ecosystem, how do applications work on the network? Are there cloud services going to be offered for storage of video and things like that are running on the network? Sort of the financial implications, budgetary, procurement, those things all need to go into our state plan, and those will be the subject topics of the CTT, the state meetings and regional webinars with all of the stakeholders.
Keone, can you explain again what CTT is?
Yeah, I'm looking for the definition of that right now. Hold on.
No worries.
It's a made-up sort of term. I think it's consultation task teams. That's what it means. So the consultation group, which I'm a part of, will have task teams that will have topical discussions in the state on this variety of issues and topics that would need to get put into the state plan. That is where the players and the stakeholders get to provide their input on those elements of the state plan.
So these would be more like workshops, where you would have
working
your
groups.
technical people, whatever the subject is?
Yeah, it'd be work groups. It could be ad hoc. It doesn't have to be statutory or any other kind of formal committees. Just working groups of people that are knowledgeable in the space about these particular things and how they're used, so we can get those nuances built into the plan. And how the network will work in California.
Okay, I just think this piece right here is probably where we're going to need to focus for 2016, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that, this is exactly where we need to put most of the focus. Like the SPOC webinars we talked about or continued outreach, those are kind of once a month, maybe twice a month type of things, but the CTT meetings, these topical meetings will have to be, phone calls that go on like pretty regularly throughout 2016.
Well, and I think what we're going to have to do in California on our side is to start identifying who the stakeholders are on different topics and put together work groups and workshop type meetings in coordination with FirstNet instead of continuing with a town hall type of approach.
Yeah, and I think it's probably easier to do them on phone calls.
Yeah, phone
Then
calls or
in-person
webinars
meetings.
would be fine because the state's so big. But I think that's where, at least from my perspective, hearing this is where we probably should be focusing our attention.
Yeah, so I'm going to be, Karen, reaching out to you and your team, and as part of the communications and consultation outreach strategy, that internal document that we're putting together, I'll be reaching out to you to help identify who are the targeted audience for those workshops.
Right.
So
Yeah,
I
we
will be
wouldn't want to
prompting
do
you
this
to help
without
me
you.
fill out- Yeah, yeah. I'll be prompting you to help me fill out that information, so it's not something you guys have to generate on your own. We'll go through a process and just start, brainstorming and laying it out.
Okay. Yeah, I just think this is
Okay.
just extremely important.
Thank you for that. Okay, and the last slide is the last part of the slide, governor's office meetings. That's really the government affairs is working kind of in tandem with us to reach the, elected officials and start talking to them about, FirstNet and the goals and objectives and values of the network, which includes what's called the executive consultation meetings, like meeting with potential cabinet members or other, boards and board of supervisors, things like that. So they're doing that in parallel to what we're doing to sort of build it up over the next 18 months for a year, just a little over a year for the governor's decision.
Well, and this governor's office meeting, this is the one that was identified in the letter that went to the governors?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So on that topic, letters that have gone out to the governors so far have been from government affairs have been about the use of reinvestment of revenue on the network and other types of things like that. But there will be another letter coming out, advising them, introducing them again to FirstNet and the process, and trying to get in front of them to discuss it, at this point, at this juncture, and probably once a quarter to make sure that they're touching base with the governor and also the congressional delegation and other folks, sort of carrying that message back and forth to D.C. and the state for, in a coordinated fashion. The other letter that will come soon in an email is about the NEPA historical preservation and some of the tribal stuff will start coming out from our office through the SPOC, and then to be sort of disseminated to understand that we have, the PDIF, process that we have to be aware of and coming forward, and our people in that office are really working towards building a project plan around what needs to happen in what fashion, what order, and what sequence in California if we were going to build infrastructure in what areas, and what do we have to navigate in order to be successful in terms of the NEPA compliance and things like that. So that will be coming soon. Yeah.
Keone,
After all that, yeah.
Keone is Ferdinand, Caltrans. Just quick question. When do you anticipate FirstNet identifying what sites they might want to co-locate with existing sites, either city, state, local? And what does FirstNet expect from the site owners as far as support resources if co-location is requested?
So FirstNet will not be negotiating co-location or site leads or anything. We are requiring the offerer on the bid to do that. So when the offer bids come back by June of 2016, we will know exactly what their partnerships and downstream, rural carrier relationships and things are, what infrastructure they might need to use, if it's state-owned or otherwise. They'll have identified that in their response and their strategy to how they're going to deploy the network. And at that point, then we get back to you with that response, if the bid was awarded to that particular vendor, and then make sure that the agencies know that, the vendors is going to come and start negotiating and talking about those locations. But at this point, FirstNet does not have the body of knowledge in terms of where all the assets are, or we're not making a determination on how to leverage them at this point. We're waiting for the offerers to come back with that strategy.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Doesn't
All right,
look
so my
like
goal
it.
is essentially, my goal then for 2016 is to get you, get California and all the agencies as much information as they can handle that is relevant, timely, and, a lot of the operational information that's going to start coming forward in standards and protocols and procedures, so that people are very well informed on supporting the conversation around FirstNet, and then so that if the governor comes asking, hey, what do you guys think about this? You're like, well, we know a lot about it. We like where it's going. We think it has, maybe there's some issues we need to resolve, but really allowing the governor to make an informed decision based on the body of knowledge that you guys have developed as a team, as a group, inside of the entire state, sort of filter up for the governor to, make his decision to opt in or opt out.
So Keone, can you attend all of our meetings from here on out? I mean, you don't have to be
I
here
can.
in person, but just like you're doing today?
Yes, I absolutely can do that.
Okay. we'll make sure that we can work them around your schedule as well. I just think your presentation has been really good today, and I think it was really important for everybody to be able to hear it from you, without, having somebody else kind of digest what you're saying and then say it again. So, thank you. I think this is just really, really important for us.
Thank
Hey,
you. That's a
Karen,
great
this is Craig.
opportunity. Craig.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Just a quick question. So the decision by the governor for FirstNet to break ground in California has not been made yet, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And that's what all the survey information, all the data that you're collecting and providing us is to help in that decision-making process.
That's correct. So
All right.
how it lays out is in first quarter of 2017, the governor will receive a final state plan that includes the strategy to build out, every location where there's going to be a tower, the phased implementation plan, all this information and data that the entire group and team of people and stakeholders have already seen at least once. And then the governor has 90 days from receiving that plan to make a decision to opt in or opt out.
Okay, thank you.
And opting in means FirstNet will build it. Opting out means the state has to come up with its own plan, get it approved by NTIA and FCC, and then figure out how to fund the build out of the network. But opting in is much easier. So we kind of recommend that folks that lean towards opting in because it's just a lot easier for a lot of states.
Keone, this is Barry Frazier. I have a quick question. You may not know the answer, so I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I know that FirstNet has hired some subject matter expert outreach folks in fire and EMS and law enforcement. Are those individuals going to be available to come to states, to California, and help with this outreach in 2016?
Yes, absolutely. For each vertical that we've hired in, whether it's EMS, 911, law enforcement, they will usually come out for any meeting like in their vertical, right? So in this case, Friday, I think Josh Ederheimer, who's our law enforcement person in outreach, will be meeting with the Cal Chiefs that I think Mitch set up that meeting for him. So he'll be briefing Cal Chiefs on FirstNet.
Yep.
So that is available to the states as well. So I just would say there's only not that many of them, and they have to travel quite a bit. So if you have a big meeting, let's get the most bang for the buck and have a lot of people there, so we can really be effective in communicating that message.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, and then on our tribal side, California is really fortunate. I think you guys all know, but if you don't, Adam Geisler has been hired by FirstNet for part of the tribal representation. And he is such a good advocate for California tribes. I'm sure he will spread that across the nation. It was a great hire by FirstNet.
Yeah, thank you. We're really lucky to have him. And also Margaret Muir. You may have met her at the Consultation. Some of you may have worked with her. Incredible background, just tremendous, individual. And she's rounding out the team for tribal under Carl Rebstock. So with the two, Adam and Margaret, they're just taking the world by storm. They're doing such a great job, and they have a big challenge with how many tribes there are nationwide, and especially in California, it's like the most of them. So really lucky and glad to have Adam join the team.
Yeah, and Margaret's also from California. So
Right, Margaret also lives in California.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, we're very lucky.
Yeah, that's would be helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you
Okay,
for the opportunity to present.
thank you, and thank you for agreeing to do this at each meeting. I just think it's so important. So we'll be talking to
Okay,
you
would you like-
soon.
Would you like me to stay on till the end of the meeting, or for any questions, or?
If you wouldn't mind, if you have the time.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is a PSAC update from Barry.
Thank you, Karen. I think, as all of you know, I am a member of the Public Safety Advisory Committee to FirstNet. The committee is a group of about 40, we've actually expanded by a couple of members, so I think 44 or 45 members from the national associations, police, fire, EMS, also state and local associations. I happen to be a member of the PSAC through an organization called NATOA, the National Organization of Telecommunications Officers and Advisors. And we, the PSAC, basically our goal is to advise and provide information and advice to FirstNet on a variety of different technical and user types of questions and issues. And so I'm going to just go over quickly what we've done since our last meeting here. We had a meeting, well, we had a couple of meetings, I guess. We had a meeting in person in June in conjunction with the FirstNet meetings, board meetings and committee meetings in San Diego. And then we also met on September 22nd by webcast. The September 22nd meeting, we went through really a FirstNet update, many of the same things that Keone just told us. I won't spend a lot of time on those issues, but a lot of the same information. Then we talked about 3 specific task teams that the PSAC has formed and been involved, specifically at the request of FirstNet to provide some information. The first one is a task team on priority and preemption, which I've talked about in the past here. We completed our task team work earlier in the fall. We provided a final report to FirstNet on that, and we think we did a lot of good work on priority and preemption, which is a very technical and complicated issue involving how traffic on the network will be prioritized. And it becomes even more complicated when you add in the fact that most likely there will be secondary use of the spectrum by non-public safety entities, and so we have to have a really good process of making sure that the first responders have the capacity on the network when they need it. We began by defining a large number of usage patterns or cases, well over 100 different possible uses for the network that we compiled as a group of about 10 or 11 first responders that were all members of the PSAC. We then took those use cases and we plugged them into various case studies, actual incidents that we compiled, and tried to kind of project how first responders would use the network during a major incident. Because we've come to the conclusion, I think, that we really won't have a problem with needing to invoke a lot of priority and preemption tools unless you get into a very large incident where you have a lot of first responders operating within a very small area, essentially onto one cell site. And so we focused on that type of scenario. So we plugged into these usage patterns into the use cases or the case studies, and then we worked with public safety communications research engineers and FirstNet engineers to develop an actual framework for prioritization, which was in the end pretty complicated. But the good news was that we believe, looking at the technology, that through dynamic control of traffic on the network, it won't be necessary to actually manually fiddle with priority and preemption, except in the very rare case where you have hundreds of responders basically trying to get on one cell site. And so we have recommended to FirstNet that there be a way to manually intervene in the case of the big one, which we believe will be rarely, if ever, happen, but that there are dynamic controls over the traffic that will allow sort of automatic prioritization and preemption that will, in most instances, not have to require any kind of manual intervention, which we want to avoid simply because we don't want people turning knobs and twisting controls because you can mess things up pretty quickly. So our end result in our report to FirstNet is that we believe that there can be a dynamic process of managing traffic on the network that will avoid having to do any kind of manual adjustment except in very rare situations. And just, so on this final report is in the hands of the FirstNet board. Now, we believe they will use this information as they develop their RFP and as they go forward. But I'm not able to give you anything yet because FirstNet hasn't really approved it, so it's still kind of, it's still confidential. But as soon as that becomes public, I think we will at least have a summary report, possibly after next week's FirstNet board meetings, and I'll distribute that to everyone. I can say that I was in Boulder, Colorado in October, and I was able to sit in on a demonstration at PSCR of the work that they're doing on testing this priority and preemption framework, and the test actually looked very good in terms of in their bench testing being able to show how that traffic management can be automatically adjusted, loading up to, I think they loaded up to 200 users on one site, and were able to still, not even preempting, but by compressing and throttling back some users who are less high on the priority list, still having the highest priority traffic come through without incident. So the technical test that I saw last month looked promising. The other two task teams that we've been working on, the public safety grade, which this is basically the public safety grade is hardening of infrastructure. That task team, we began by discussing basically what are the critical assets that have to have coverage regardless. Police stations, fire stations, hospitals, airports, those types of places we know have to be high on the hardening list. We have to have good infrastructure, good sites that won't go down to cover these critical assets. We identified all of these assets across the United States and basically applied some filters to better manage this information. But we basically put all of this stuff into 1 mile by 1 mile grids to identify where we most needed the hardened sites to stay up.
Wait, Barry, I want to ask a question. You took
Yes.
the nation and you broke it down to 1 mile grids?
We didn't do that, but the FirstNet engineers working with us
That's what
did it.
they-
We identified what sites need to be the highest protection. And then they took lists of where all these locations are. For instance, every fire station throughout the country is in a federal database list. They were able to identify where these fire stations were, and they put them into a 1 mile by 1 mile grid. 19 other asset layers or asset types we identified as being important. We actually prioritized some of them as being more important, less important. But they actually plugged each site into this map. But then what we had to do, because it was really useless because there were so many sites, we had to apply some filters and work with the data to kind of normalize it. For instance, in a 1 mile grid, I'll just take downtown New York City for instance, that there are dozens of high important sites in a 1 mile grid. So we kind of normalized that data and applied some filters to basically level it all out.
Wow.
Then, all that did though was identify where we felt we needed protection. The other piece is there are specific geographic hazards. In our state, it's earthquakes, flooding, mudslides. On the East Coast, it's hurricanes. In the Midwest, it's tornadoes. Different types of hardening techniques probably will be required based on the geographic hazard. we identified hazards, a specific set of hazards, but that's really as far as we were able to go with the PSAC. And what I recommended, and I think what I hope FirstNet does, is take the information as far as we got with it, and go back to the states through state consultation to identify specifically where are the flooding hazards, where are the earthquake zones in your state, because the state's going to have a much better idea where these where these specific areas are than, you know, a group of a dozen people in a room. So I think that was the recommendation we came back with, was that there needs to be more work done on the specific areas that need to be hardened through geographic threats. And that's going to have to come through state consultation.
So that process will help identify which sites need to be hardened, because everybody knows we can't harden all of them.
That's the issue, right?
Okay.
That's the issue, and I should have made that clear. The $7 billion or $6.5 billion that we have now to build this network will not pay for a generator at every site, will not pay for all of the, you know, the hardening that needs to occur. Not to mention the fact that there are some sites that just, it won't be feasible to have a generator. You might, you know, so you have to work with the sites, but you want to make sure you have sites in areas where you need to have the coverage most that won't go down. And so it really is looking at prioritizing, and to be honest, when we first started this process, we had folks from fire and folks from law enforcement that said, look, you can't do this. Every site's important. and it is. That's true. You want to have every site up if possible, but the reality is, with the resources we have for this, we're probably going to need to prioritize to some extent. And I think that's an important decision that needs to be addressed in state consultation. And in fact, I think that will be one of the areas for the CTT meetings that Keone mentioned. I think we'll have to look at site hardening at the state level next year. So that's what we've done with that. The third area, I have not really been involved. I was not on this task group, but there was a group that looked at user equipment and a variety of different kind of needs for the users on devices. What users needed to have with respect to their handheld devices, with their portable devices, mobile devices. I think they even looked at wearable technology, that type of thing. And that one is still somewhat in development, but the dialogue that group is having with FirstNet, I think, will help shape the user experience and help influence device design. Again, I think going into the RFP to provide information on what types of devices potential proposers or vendors are going to need to ensure that we have on the network. So as I said, the final reports for all three groups, I think, have been delivered to FirstNet, and I expect that they will review those at the meetings next week and hopefully approve them, and we'll have some final reports that we can distribute. So the next meeting of the PSAC is next week. We're meeting on the 9th and 10th. We're in Houston, Texas. We'll meet in conjunction with the FirstNet board and committees. There will be information. Part of the PSAC meeting is now public. Will be publicly webcast. So I'll also distribute information about that and get it out to to CalFRN, so you can listen in on it. And two other things I wanted to mention, not directly related to PSAC, but there are technical items that we may very well see in these CTT meetings next year. I was, well, let me start with NPSBN. I'm pretty heavily involved with, NPSBN is the National Public Safety Telecommunications Council. And we've developed work groups as well on a variety of different technical issues. The NIPSTIC is established or announced that they were going to establish 3 new work groups. One on LTE to LMR migration, which actually should be fascinating, but I don't know if I'll have time to participate on that. The focus of that group is that while everyone understands that LMR networks aren't going away anytime soon, we are going to have this time period where we're going to have LMR, we're going to have LTE, which is capable of supporting some voice services, we know, not mission-critical voice, but some services. And then at some point in the future, there could be a convergence or a shifting of LMR over to LTE when the standards become acceptable and the service can support mission-critical voice. So NIPSTIC wants to take a look at that timeline and that transition and first try to understand better what types of confusion there might be if some agencies are using LMR and some agencies have decided to move to LTE, and then also what's going to be required specifically from the LTE technology to make it mission critical.
Okay.
And so
This really piques my interest.
it's, yeah, I would,
So, because we have John Lemon, who's very involved with NIPSTIC as well, do you know if they're allowing additional people to be on?
Yes, they have opened these 3 groups up to anyone, I assume anyone who wants to become a member or wants to participate.
Okay.
And there's a website where you can sign up.
We'll focus on that. I just think this is something we have to be involved in.
I'm going to send out a notice about this probably tomorrow, and I know John's on the list, but.
If you could CC
might
me
wanna-
on that?
Yes,
Okay.
As a suspect, can you send that to me too?
yes.
Part of our strategy in accommodating the requirements of HR 3630 with the vacation of the T-band
Yes,
is to build a 700 system, but, we're going from 600 channels countywide in UHF to probably 84 channels, at 12.5, so even if you double this by going phase 2,
Right,
we're
right.
looking at 120 channels to replace 600. And part of the strategy is this, we've got to be able to offload some of the routine communications to LTE.
yes.
So
This will be right down
that's
the alley.
absolutely right down
Yep.
the alley, so
Yep.
I'd very much like to become involved in that.
All right, we'll just get it to Sue, you can distribute it to the
Definitely.
entire board. Okay, we'll get that out. The other 2 are also very fascinating. There's a new one on unmanned aircraft systems, drones, and robotics, and how, specifically how those types of technology will be able to be connected wirelessly through data networks and what the advantages will be. And also there will be, obviously there's still some legal and policy issues that are outstanding with drones that,
A few.
that this group will be looking at as well. And then the third one is, I will be getting on this one. It's basically a broadband emerging technologies work group, which is really kind of, I think they're designing this to set up to be able to handle issues that come up that we don't really anticipate right now, but that FirstNet might announce a need to submit comments on, or that something, some research needs to be worked on, and this group is, so it's kind of a catch-all, I think, at this point. But as issues come up, this working group will be designed to tackle them. And then finally, on that note, I was in Colorado in October at what was called a location-based services summit, which was actually a fantastic couple of days. Location-based services really are the services that allow you to pinpoint with a lot of accuracy down to inches where a person or a resource or an asset is in the field. This is their location-based services work that's being done in the 911 arena right now, but this is a little bit different. The 911 location-based services is focused on how to pinpoint a caller, a cell phone caller, when they call into 911. We were looking more at how to identify where officers are, where assets are, where things in the field are for situational awareness, and also for combining that information with other environmental information to develop what are called analytical data sets that will allow incident commanders to better work, to better plan and command a large-scale incident in the field. And we talked about everything from wearable technology to using a variety of different networks, Wi-Fi networks and other networks to identify more precise location services. And the whole goal of this was actually to try to provide the PSCR, Public Safety Communications Research, with some better information on how to spend some research and development funding that they received as part of the spectrum auctions that also generated the FirstNet money. So we spent a lot of time on this, but it's actually something that I think will become more and more important as a tool that first responders will end up using on a FirstNet type network when it gets built. But I saw a lot of real value, especially in situational awareness and incident command types of scenarios, being able to understand where your resources are and project where they can be used. So I just wanted to mention that. That may be something we'll see more of through these CTT meetings as well, in terms of how we can use the network. So that's pretty long-winded. I think that's everything I wanted to cover, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Well, I just think all this is exciting. Really I do. It feels like FirstNet is like growing some legs and actually moving now.
Yeah.
I mean, this is awesome. Was there any work groups or conversations of a work group on the connectivity between the 911 and FirstNet?
Not as yet, not yet, no.
Next Gen 911 is a slow-moving process. So we're going to have to connect FirstNet with our PSAPs prior to Next Gen potentially.
Yes.
Potentially. And then, Keone, are you still there?
Yes.
There was some money in this whole act that was supposed to be for 911 as well. Do you know if those grants are going to be coming out soon?
I don't know. I don't have any information on that. On 911
Okay.
money.
We know that the money has gone to Department of Transportation in conjunction with NTIA, but I don't have a timeline. It's not anytime soon.
Okay, I'll call Lori Flaherty.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And
I know that, Karen, that the spectrum relocation grants are in place. So for any of the D block, 700 megahertz use, but that's the only thing.
Okay, yeah, and I was just wondering about the 911, and I know it was supposed to come much later, but if there's some R&D being done, it would be nice maybe if part of that could be used at the national level on how we're going to make sure that the PSAPs are connected even prior to Next Gen. Just a thought. I'll call Lori. Thanks.
So, and just to add, so from the PSAC, we only do work that FirstNet specifically requests.
Right.
And so they have not requested that we do anything with Next Gen 911. If they do, and they might, we'd be, I think, happy to work on that. PSCR has research and development funding, quite a bit of it, but I think because of there's also funding allocated to Next Gen 911, it may not be really high on their list of priorities.
Oh, there's so many priorities.
Yeah, but it's something that obviously it's a good area for research and development, and so some of this funding probably needs to be
Well,
applied.
especially as we're looking at the location-based services summit, I just hate to have one technology go out and solve one problem when we have another problem, if they could work together and to solve
Yep.
the
We-
bigger problem.
And we recognize that PSCR is not the only entity working on
Right.
location-based services, and one of their tasks, I think, is to basically monitor what's going on with Next Gen 911, what's going on with private, industry research on the same types of services, and not duplicate what's going on in other places, but focus on where the gaps are.
Well, and the FCC has provided a good 6 years for location-based accuracy for 911 for wireless calls. And even at that, it's only 80%. So anything, this is something, Keone, if you could take back for us, anything that could be leveraged from the FirstNet side of the house, because Next Gen 911, and actually 911 is mentioned in the act, that we could even get ahead of on some of this location-based accuracy issues that we've been dealing with, just to make sure when we're looking at this, we're looking at it very holistically.
Yeah, I can tell you that I just had a brief this week from the CTO's office, and they are absolutely looking at how PSAPs integrate the NG911 and FirstNet in terms of a service provider transport of that data and information. So the PSAPs are being included in the basic architecture at this point in how it's being sort of put together and envisioned. So.
Okay, the only thing that I would recommend is that they don't just look at Next Gen 911. If we're really looking at having this network up in 2018, I don't think you will see the nation with a Next Gen 911 solution by then, or even close to it.
Okay.
I wish. But it won't happen.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Anybody have any other questions?
Thank you.
I'm excited. This is awesome. Okay, so the next item is Steve to talk about our data collection update and what we did.
Thank you. Okay, so coming out of the consultation back in July, there was a window of time to submit and collect data across all the jurisdictions in California for the sake of painting a picture of what California's need was in terms of coverage. And we have a diagram up here that shows how we came about taking that data that was submitted through the survey period and then turning that into a visual representation of where geographically that's located in California. But before we get too far into the picture, I want to talk a little bit about the data that we got and then how we extrapolated from that to paint the whole picture for California. Because although we did get better response to the data, or to the survey request, it wasn't 100% covering every single first responder and jurisdiction in the state. And it was always going to be a suboptimal submission, so we would have to always correct that to paint the whole picture for California. So we got great response, there was room for improvement, so we had to use methodologies, ratios to cover the gaps that weren't hit. So in doing that, a lot of what we did was take the data that was submitted, actual data, and then figure out, okay, what ratio are they providing to us in terms of number of employees, number of vehicles, the ratio between the numbers of employees and the numbers of vehicles, the number of devices to vehicles, the number of devices to employees, all of those kinds of correlations. Use those to extrapolate for areas that didn't submit data. So if we get a robust response from San Francisco County or Sacramento County, but we don't get a robust response from El Dorado, then we can use the data we do have to make a correlation of, okay, well, what generally are we seeing? And if it turns out to be...
Karen, I think the phone line is muted.
Oh, sorry.
It's not.
Okay. Yeah, how about now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
So, as I was saying, we took the data that we did receive, actual data, and then used that to extrapolate to areas where we did not receive data. And in doing that, we created some ratios that we thought represented in, as accurate a way as possible those other areas. So, that's the main concept by which we painted this picture for California, because we got, in the hundreds of responses to our survey request, but we needed to make sure we represented hundreds of thousands of first responders throughout the state of California. So, in doing that, we took the data that we had, extrapolated in that way, and came up with the response that was submitted September 30th to FirstNet, representing what we knew of our first responder universe. Then after that, we took that data and we put it on this map, which we're showing here. And so this data that's represented on this map illustrates all of our 911 calls for the 2014 year, the calendar year. Those are all mapped on that, laid over the state of California to illustrate where those calls were coming from. We thought that was a pretty good indicator of where the need would be, but it wasn't a perfect indicator. And so we also needed to include some other things on there. And one of those things was, okay, where are some hazards that we normally run into in terms of fault lines, in terms of fire threat, in terms of flooding threats. Those types of things are also laid on there. And by overlaying all of these data sets, then we came up with an answer that was submitted to FirstNet that showed, here's our 911 calls, here's our fire threat, here's our flooding threat, here's where our tribal lands are located that need to have coverage in those areas as well. And you'll look at that map and you'll see that the coverage that we're indicating on there follows essentially the highway systems, the Central Valley, the coastline, and we wanted to make sure that FirstNet understood that where we presently have coverage isn't necessarily where we need to have coverage going forward. And so these types of layers of data helped us to sort of push the boundary out a little bit further so that we get the data we need, not the data we have. That was the general concept. And so we weren't trying to actually pinpoint what data was the correct answer today for any specific jurisdiction, but we wanted to say, what's the big picture look like for California? So it might not comport with what you know to be factual for a specific jurisdiction, but it's intended to say, here's what California's need is.
And this does not necessarily translate into what the coverage will look like when we get our state plan. This is just our presentation to FirstNet, and the first layer on there, and you can't see that really well up on the screen, but the first layer that we started with was the data map that we got from FirstNet. So FirstNet gave us a really good base that we started with, and then we overlaid as we saw the information. And what it did is it broadened it. What FirstNet gave us was not that far off. We just broadened the scope a little bit based on the additional data components that we added. When we first, and I'm just going to say this because it was kind of funny and it's California, but when we first identified all the hazards, including wildland fires, the map was solid, and we knew that was never going to happen. So we did back out the wildland fire piece, not all of it, because you can see down in Southern California and the San Diego is huge, and then up in the North Coast a little bit too. But we could not possibly include all the wildland fire pieces. So what the premise would be, in our minds sitting here, is that there would be FirstNet enabled deployables whenever there is a wildland fire, because there's not people out there sometimes.
So, I got a couple of questions. This is Kevin Guerrero from CalFIRE. We received this particular map on the 17th of November at CalFIRE to validate some of the areas, operational areas, offices, et cetera, that weren't reflected on the map. Obviously, there's not a lot of granularity here. I mean, you can't really focus in. We didn't get it in a GIS type format. I've asked for that since, and we're working with your office to do that. But one of the things that I didn't know, what fire threat layer did you guys use? Did you use fire hazard severity zone? Did you come to CalFIRE for that? Where did you get that information?
Okay, so the data that we use came from the at the consultation, we actually had a map up there, which did come from CalFire,
Okay.
which it had gradients of fire severity.
Fire hazard severity zone.
Yes,
Okay.
and so we use that as one of the layers to put in there.
Okay, do you have the metadata on how you came up with these, what layers you used? Because that would be interesting to see, is what you used in the background to create these
Yeah.
additional layers. And again, the other part of it is, again, we haven't had an opportunity really to review it. I'm sure some of the other agencies that are involved in the rural areas as well haven't had a chance to look at where the jurisdictional boundaries are, if we're gonna be doing deployables, where, because there's, I mean, just knowing the way our area is laid out, there are some significant gaps there.
Well, and I need to help with something. This is our perception that we gave to FirstNet. We
Right.
don't know what we will get back.
When did you give it to FirstNet?
Actually, I haven't actually given it to them yet.
Okay, good.
Sorry,
That
County.
was that was our question, because they said,
It
we
will
just
go-
got this on the 17th of
Yeah,
November to
no,
look at.
no,
so-
FirstNet has the same data because
Right.
they have the same data that we have. And I know that they're looking at it as well, but we have not actually given it to them, but they do have the data. So we will give it to them after, of course, we get the rest of the review. But this, I don't see it changing a whole lot unless you have some really good data that we can add, which I hope you do, in some of these areas that are clearly not reflected, because the southern part of California, the southeastern part is a lot of federal land, and I think when we overlay what the feds are doing with this, the DOD is doing with this, Joe Wassel, and I think you guys all met him at our state consultation, what we're going to see is that piece is going to be filled in because we have such of a large military presence. When you look at the northern part of California is where I think we will have the biggest challenge.
Well, that's the thing, I just wanted to make sure that if you didn't have fire hazard severity zone maps or that kind of data from our folks, that you guys were incorporating that, or at least able to access it. Whether or not it was useful or not, you guys can determine that when you're doing your.
Well, it covered our whole,
stuff, so.
it covered our whole
Understood.
state.
Understood.
We were solid.
But given where we had some of our major fires this year, there's a big white spot right there.
Right.
Specifically the Valley Fire.
Yep.
And
Yes.
so it's one of those things where I just, looking at that map right there without even being able to zoom in on it, I'm seeing some issues. So.
Right, and those are the types of thing that we need back from you. So, but we would not
So-
want to have the whole map.
Right, that's why we're getting the GIS layer, so our
Right, right.
GIS folks can look at it and then kind of plug that in and just kind of
Yep.
validate it. So
Yep.
I just wasn't sure how far this has went, and I'm sure the other agencies that are involved here at the table probably want to look at it too.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, no, it hasn't actually, they have, like I said, they have this information, but we have not sent it over
Outstanding.
officially to them.
Okay.
Hi, Kenny.
And the concept goes back to what Barry was saying earlier, as far as we can't harden everything, just
Right.
like we
Right.
can't, I mean,
Right.
we would all love 100% coverage, but realizing we can't have it, and then trying to figure out what do we build for that's there every day, and then how do we fill in the holes when we have a fire where there's not much, but be able to have connectivity and make sure we
Yep.
have the deployables that can be deployed in a timely manner, so that we're not sitting there waiting for it. Because obviously we
Yep.
want that connectivity as quickly as possible.
And that's one of those things, that strategic deployment of, or pre-positioning of the deployables is something that might need to be addressed at some point, given that there's gonna be lots of white on there as well.
Yep.
In those areas that are in the outlying areas. It's something probably we're gonna discuss.
One of the biggest hurdles that we're looking at with the deployables that we're putting out is the backhaul. And I mean, you can put a cell on wheel out there, and if it's not connected to anything, you might be able to talk to device, but you're not gonna be able to talk beyond the range of that. So, one of the strategies that could be considered is to pre-identify, because maintaining a system is what's the killer. I mean, not only the capital expenditure, but maintaining it, but would be to identify certain points, perhaps in those areas, that we're not going to have a deployable on a permanent basis or coverage on a permanent basis, but at least to identify some points where there's a fiber connection or where there's a cable connection, or where there's a microwave, one of the three, and then make sure that all the cows have the ability for a cable connection, for a fiber connection, and for a microwave connection, or perhaps via satellite connection. But again, putting a cow out there and pre-positioning it doesn't do squat if it's not hooked up with a backhaul.
Oh, come on. Well, and one of the things that we're working on, and Adelina is really involved in this, is we're paying attention, and this is like Adelina's world, so jump in. But to all the broadband projects that are going on statewide. And the CPUC has projects, and we're working closely with Sunny McPeak, which was also at our state consultation. So there is a large group and several consortiums working toward getting broadband out to the rural areas. And it's going to be extremely important for us to know that as we look at what we're doing with FirstNet for that particular reason, because we are going to have some deployables. I don't know how we could ever have hard connections throughout the state, but we do have to have backhaul, or it's just not going to make a whole lot of sense. And so what's happening in the rurals right now with getting the broadband pushed out for education and healthcare purposes will really help on the FirstNet side, especially when it comes to the healthcare piece. And with you looking at, knowing that the hospitals would have to have a hardened type of a site, and then knowing that through this broadband push to the digital divide would be going to the hospitals, it kind of is a seamless connection there for FirstNet.
That's why I was actually glad to hear about the third work group, or one of the work groups you were talking about, that talks about the broadband emerging technologies. I think
Yes.
that'll pick up a lot of that. There is a lot of work going on in California, but still a lot more to be done.
And if I remember correctly, I believe rural coverage was one of the specific bullets under that working group, so they will be looking at those types of issues.
Yeah.
Then the other thing I just wanted to mention is, or maybe actually this is a question, because you have this coverage, but then you also have FirstNet's definition of rural.
Right.
And I guess my question is, how is that going to, if some of these areas are in a rural area defined by FirstNet, will the state have to provide something extra?
Will coverage be there? Yep.
Or will coverage be there, or will FirstNet not be required to provide the same level of coverage in those rural areas?
I do believe the FirstNet definition of rural is going to impact that map. But
Yeah.
that's the analysis that we have to do, because I think our rural areas that we define as rural may not be the same as the FirstNet's definition of rural. And I know that we're not the only state that is struggling with this right now.
And right now also, Assemblymember Wood, his district is up in Northern California, and so he's really focused on looking at how to bring more broadband to that area. So he had one hearing in November, he's having another hearing supposedly, I think it's on December 16th or early December, and then he's planning another hearing in early 2016. So he's very focused on trying to make sure that somehow gets up there and gets improved.
But so it brought about the FirstNet of what we're doing, and I worked with FirstNet to get the talking points to push out with where we're at on the FirstNet side of the House, but I do know that he's going to want more information at the next hearing. And then in addition, Steve Yarborough attended a meeting with Congressman Huffman about broadband in rural area. I think that was in Willits.
Yeah.
And FirstNet came up, and you can speak
Sure.
to what he was looking at for FirstNet
Yeah.
as well.
So, yeah, the congressman represented the 2nd District of California, essentially started the meeting off wanting everybody to just agree to the fact that broadband coverage in rural areas was a problem that needed to be addressed. And so with that baseline, the conversation revolved around how can we meet that need, bridge that digital divide, as it were. And so it was a robust conversation, but it was the first conversation of what he wants to be several conversations to work our way through to a solution for the Mendocino area specifically, but through his entire district, which I believe overlaps with the other districts for the state representatives.
Yes. So we do have legislative interest in broadband in California, especially in the rural areas, but they do have an interest now with where FirstNet is going and what the other projects are doing to make sure as government, we're paying attention and we're not going off separately and doing one thing without considering the second. And FirstNet plays a big part in all of this, no matter what we do in the rural parts of California, even the larger metropolitan parts of California. With broadband, we always have to be considering what FirstNet's needs might be, just to leverage whatever we're doing. And the same goes for FirstNet. So once we know what our coverage maps will actually look like with our state consultation process, we will then turn around and share that with our broadband consortia that are working on these, just to make sure that as government, we're all working together on this. Because we're serving the same people.
And to further that point, it's not a static target we're trying to hit. I mean, so the conversation, although we're meeting a deadline to submit some data, it has to continue because as the population demographics change and the population centers move, the needs of the network are going to have to adapt to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think we should look at it as, okay, let's get this data set submitted. We got to keep collecting data, and that's why we want to continue working with everybody ongoing to collect more and more data to get better data, even as it changes over the months and years. I mean, we're talking about rolling this thing out 2018, 2022. What's California going to look like then?
Any other questions? So we will send this, and honestly, I just don't remember. There's been a lot on my plate lately. If we did not send that map out to you electronically, we will, to the board members, and take a look at it. And then if you need to have it where you can actually look at it a little bit closer as with CalFIRE needs, just let us know, and we can get that to you as well. I felt like, see, I keep looking at you, Scott, I felt like CHP was pretty well covered based on the 911 calls.
Got the highways covered.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just the question was, are all of our fire stations, represented on there? I can't tell you. I mean, I've got,
You can't.
500 fire stations.
Yeah.
I can't tell you that one's there today. But yeah, as soon as if I can get you the point file, or, whatever, get you the shape files, then that'll be great.
Yep, and that's the type of information we want to make sure is captured in that. Okay?
One more thing on the coverage maps. When we do the state agency town hall, is this map going to be available?
Yes.
I
Yes,
think that's going to be very
absolutely.
important. The state agency town hall so some of the other agencies that are out there are going to have an idea, because that's where most of them do their work.
And what we'll do, because looking at this is really difficult. It is. But we put the big maps up at the state consultation. We'll have some large maps up that people will actually be able to look at. And I know Water Resources should be wondering just because of where we have our dams, and they're going to be focusing on that.
Just a real quick tangent then, I'm just going to, on the state agency town hall thing, since we're kind of talking about it. You invited DWR. The comment was made about the Coastal Commission. Have they been invited? Is that something that would be worthwhile, especially if we're talking about, you brought up earlier that they're going to have jurisdiction over some of this area, and if this is, are they technically a state agency, I know they're a commission, but have they been attending any of our town hall meetings or where?
They have not been working with us at all, and I think that's our fault. We haven't reached out to them. So we will absolutely invite them to this town hall.
Same with Air Resources Board, CalEPA, those folks.
CalEPA we've been working with.
All right, just thoughts on it.
We just need to go back and look at the boards and commissions and make sure we include them.
I agree.
Yep. Because they're staff of state
Well,
employees.
if they've got jurisdiction over some of this stuff, I would hate to have a speed bump that we
Yep.
could have avoided potentially.
Yep.
It's not a speed bump, it's a wall.
Speaking from experience.
And it's a big speed bump.
Okay, anything else?
Hey, Karen, this is Keone. I have one request then on the maps, and you present them at the town halls, that it doesn't say coverage map, but instead says coverage objectives map.
Okay.
Because these are objectives for coverage, they're not actual stated coverage where it's going to actually be.
Yeah, we've been talking like they're coverage maps, but the actual document does say objectives.
Okay, great.
But I think we need to include that just in how we present this, so good point.
Yeah, and then I'll only add one thing, excuse me, on the definition of rural. So the final legal definition of, the rural area is pretty narrow, and what ends up happening is that, you know, the most of the census places, if you did the analysis on the census places based on the greater than 20,000 population and or tangent or adjacent to, you know, an urban area, urbanized area with 50,000 or more people, you know, the overwhelming majority of the landmass of the United States is designated as rural. So there will be substantial rural coverage based on the definition of rural in this thing, because it goes way beyond, you know, the urban areas are very few and far between. In fact, based on the latest analysis on this definition, about 97.6% of the landmass of the United States and OCONUS East and West is considered rural based on the current definition. That means only 2.4% of the landmass is considered urban. So there will be substantial rural coverage based on this kind of proportionality of, you know, the definition of the geography.
Oh, that's really good to hear, Keone.
Because the definition is very, I guess you'd call it narrow, 20,000.
I just, and 20,000 is narrow, but I know, I'm looking at Weedy Hannibal right now. I don't think a lot of our northern parts of California will be covered by that. So we'll have to
Very
take a
few.
look.
Yeah, that's what I.
Right.
Take a look and see what this means as we look at our coverage objectives.
Yeah. And then just so you know that the technical teams and state planning teams are working on figuring out the ratio or the formula for ensuring that, you know, metro and metro areas build out in a phased implementation and the rural build out will be proportionate.
Okay, so the proportionate meaning the 20% that's in the law, or proportionate in how you're building it?
Proportionate, if the offerers come back with a coverage sort of objective map and what they're going to build out, that if any of that coverage exists, you know, how much of that coverage proportionally exists in the metro area, it has to be matched in a rural defined area. So there can be a substantial metric for a rural deployment.
Okay, and that's good.
So it's
That's
kind of like
important.
nobody left behind, right? You want to sort of bridge that digital divide and force that constraint on the implementation vendor, so that we ensure that rural gets done.
Absolutely, and especially if there's some sort of coverage there when FirstNet rolls out, it just makes everything easier.
Yeah, and I think there's always an opportunity to, instead of using the word substantial for rural milestones, to think of what it would be significant or like high value or of value locations where you strategically want, you know, the network to be. That can kind of, I think, trump some of the rural development because of its value of a particular location.
Yep, I agree. And if we could couch that, I think that would be good as we go through the state consultation process.
Yeah.
Awesome, good. Any other comments?
We'll give you an update on where we are
Yes.
with Valley Ricks. So by the end of September, which was the end of our grant period before we got the 5-year extension, you know, FirstNet, NTIA had been pushing us very much to complete the hard construction by September 30th, which we did. So we completed 63 permanent installations, and we've got 14 cell on wheels deployed. Unfortunately, one of the CHP sites we looked at, you'd have to take up the captain's parking space, and that wasn't going over really well. So,
See, it's not just the fire guys.
well, it wasn't, no, their issue wasn't.
Those too late.
Their issue wasn't the RF emissions, theirs was losing the parking space. And it's
Even
really
more
understandable.
important.
Yeah. The site was extremely tight to begin with. So we are in the process of doing system optimization now. We'll be doing actually cluster tuning throughout the rest of this month and actually going into next year. We have committed to NTIA that we will be up and supporting the Rose Parade on January the 1st. I think they're deploying 14 cameras, which will all be backhauled through Band 14, as well as 60 handheld devices for the field supervisors. So that should be a good test. We also did a kind of a beta test of it during the West Hollywood Halloween event, which is a very well-attended, very small venue of about 500,000 people on Hollywood Boulevard, or maybe it's Sunset Boulevard. It was interesting that AT&T and Verizon Wireless had brought in cell on wheels to enhance the coverage. At 5 o'clock, they had lightning fast transfer speeds. By 9 o'clock, it was down to less than half a megabyte, and everything came to a stop. We had one Homeland Security video truck out operating on the system. They had no problem with connectivity throughout the event. They actually had a power failure at the command post. Fortunately, the laptops were running on battery, so we were able to continue having backhaul into the command post of what was actually happening on the streets, and that video truck was actually able to direct some first responders into a man down that was on the street because they could see him, and because they could see him, they were able to communicate. So that was very good. We just yesterday submitted the detailed project plan for exercising our key learning conditions evaluation, which is to evaluate system loading, overloading, and then prioritization and priority preemption. We are a little concerned about and actually it's in this register report of the interpretation of the act by FirstNet and their definition of what they're now calling secondary users. While this is a little bit vague as to what a secondary user is absolutely defined as in some of the pre-reads and the questions, there was some stronger terms that were used which would pretty much eliminate anybody that's not a first responder from using the system, other than as a secondary or commercial user. And I'm very concerned from a public safety standpoint that the way that this could be interpreted would be to preclude those secondary, not users, but those secondary responders. We had a meeting yesterday with Metropolitan Transit Authority is interested in putting Band 14 devices on their buses. They could use their buses for AVL, they could use their buses to stream video, with a panic button at the driver, so that public safety, when they're rolling in on an incident on a bus, perhaps can see video. But if they have to be on a commercial system and be competing with the commercial customers, that becomes problematic. Additionally, we would like to be able to deploy those resources, much like Houston did when they had a hurricane coming in through the Gulf. They used buses to evacuate people. Caltrans would be, an excellent resource to the fire services during some of the fires where you've got. But if they're not a quote-unquote first responder or they're non-public safety services, then you pretty much preclude those and put those into a category where, they would be competing with a commercial customer. And those are assets that the public safety needs to be able to respond to an incident. Road departments, parks departments, and some of the municipal services, buses, animal control for livestock
Utilities.
evacuation
Well,
during
and we were
fire.
thinking utilities.
And
my
and
goodness.
public utilities.
Yeah.
Now, and that's probably the biggest stretch, because those truly aren't municipal services, except in some instances, they are municipal services. They're run by the local
Absolutely.
government. But when you have the big winds, or when you have fires that are burning down the wires, you have to be able to communicate with those to be most effective in your response. And I'm a little concerned with the vagueness of the interpretation, particularly when you look at it with some of the input that was received during their analysis of this. And I think from a sustainability model, I realize perhaps the FirstNet's looking at a sustainability by triaging and arbitraging the excess spectrum. But from the local perspectives, the cost of supporting a cellular system for strictly first responders, police, fire, and EMS, is going to be cost prohibitive unless you're able to bring on other users that you want to incorporate into your public safety response. And putting those on the system, such as MTA, they got 2,500 buses. You know, that's, even at, you know, $30, $40 a month, that's, you know, that's a couple $1 million that could be used to make that system sustainable from a business standpoint. So,
Wow.
so.
We will take a look at that closer. I was kind of reading that on the opposite, is that it was vaguely defined, so we could define it.
If we're allowed to define it, that's great.
I'm a glass half full kind of person.
It's a very liberal viewpoint.
That's right.
As an example, you know, during the analysis, so there's some associations, APCO, that feel that nobody but first responders should be on the system. But that's a very narrow standpoint, because, you know, from an APCO standpoint, you're sitting in a PSAP, or you're
Right,
sitting in a
right.
dispatch center, and all you're talking to is the police, the fire, and EMS.
Right.
But it's out in the field that you need those other resources.
Well,
Right.
and I think that's where the preemption piece becomes so important. Okay, so you have all those buses, but we have a hostage situation. Obviously, we need a prioritization to say, hey, we need these folks first, kick the buses or throttle them back if needed, but when we need the buses to be able to,
Right, what my concern is, if you put all the buses in with the commercial users, you're
just
not
off.
gonna identify them. They're-
Right. Right.
And then that's a resource that you lose.
Right.
That's my
yeah.
concern.
Wow.
Yeah, I agree. This is something we've been arguing for years now, really, is a broad definition of public safety user. I'm not sure that FirstNet has completed its work on defining what a public safety service is yet. And I'm not sure if they plan to provide a definition of that, what a public safety service is later on, or leaving it vague.
Like I said, I thought it was left it open for all the states to kind of provide who they needed.
I'm not gonna put my foot in my mouth here, but I reiterate, I support and ditto what Pat is saying, is that we need to have a broad definition of public safety service, to allow our first responders and second responders to work together.
We will follow up with FirstNet on that. Kenny, I won't put you on the spot on this at all. We will follow up and find out the intent behind this. Because if it
This
is.
is Craig, and I would just say regarding the comments that this is an interesting comments that was just brought up, and I would have to agree. We certainly want to be able, during any type of response, to have the broadband available to all responding, whether they're primary responders or not.
Yep.
Right, but the gate for accessing the network is authenticating the user as a designated public safety entity, providing, you know, any kind of first responder or public safety emergency services. So that can, and it's very, the public safety entity at this point is very broadly defined. The services that run under that is kind of discretionary, I think, at this point for the state to kind of design that, but they have to actually be a subscriber on the network to be on the network, you know. So if you activate a bunch of, you know, people or agencies or, like, you know, electric utility workers or something that are not already on the network, they have to get registered to get on the network, so, and have a device. So it's kind of, there's some planning required, you know. It's not just like an in the moment decision that you can have people access the network.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, those are some good points that was brought up, so we certainly have to look at that.
Yeah, we'll be circling back around, Keone.
Okay, great.
Yeah, because I agree with you on the subscriber, and if we're allowed to have the utilities be a subscriber, to have like BART in the Bay Area be a subscriber, to have buses be a subscriber, if we're allowed to do that, then I think we're okay. But if there's going to be a limitation on who our secondary responders are and a limitation on our subscribers, then I think more discussion needs to be had.
Well, it's gonna have to be a more strategic discussion in general, because when you, not that I think that it should be exclusive, but when you start to leave that initial realm of defined first responders, you start to go from, you know, major bus providers and transit folks to school districts, to large health institutions, to colleges, and everybody's gonna want, and arguably will have valid reasons for being on the system. So I think that's something that we want to approach somewhat strategically or delicately.
You're right. Yeah.
You know, just
Yeah.
my initial thoughts,
Yeah.
or the concept, to me, the concept of having a cache of devices regionally that can be deployable to partners is something that is a little, I guess in my mind, appropriate, that when you have a significant event, that you're able to get devices to that second layer of support and response quickly. Like I say, it seems easy to think about transit partners and that kind of stuff now in public utilities and this kind of thing. But it basically opens the door for a lot of people for daily use activities, which I don't know is the actual intent.
Yeah, and I don't know that that's the intent either.
Yeah.
So it does have to be strategic, but a lot of our secondary responders, we need to have them on. So we have to be very thoughtful in identifying, because the list could go on. I mean.
It could go on and on and on and
Yeah.
on and on and on.
I could justify myself at home needing this.
I mean, anybody who wants a guaranteed access to communication, anybody who wants guaranteed access to broadband is gonna wanna make a justification if we open that door. And like I said, that's why I think that, you know, thinking about strategic stockpiles and that kind of thing, to me at least makes a little bit more sense than opening that door, but that's just my personal opinion.
And I think that's where where the local control issue comes in, you know, from a national basis to a state basis, even to a regional or local basis, because, you know, one of the things that he points out is it's a very costly system to operate and maintain. And if now you're saying, well, we're not going to deploy those assets, we're going to hold them as a cache. First, you have to buy those assets. Those aren't cheap. And then you have to pay for the system. The thinking behind this, the secondary responders, is that if they could help offset the cost of operating the system, because they use it on a daily basis, and I'm not saying give it to everybody, and I think that is a local decision. But, you know, if you can expand your user base, you know, and suppress the cost, then the cost becomes a decision whether you pay $35 to AT&T or Verizon, or whether you pay $35 to FirstNet.
But wasn't the cost of ongoing maintenance in the system itself supposed to be offset by the selling of broadband spectrum?
That's a threshold yet to be crossed.
And I think
Well, I
that's
thought that
part
was the
of,
whole tenet behind FirstNet.
well, I think that is, but I think we
For
won't know
funding.
what it is until the RFP's awarded.
Right. I just think we need to
Yeah.
be cautious opening up the door.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
I
think-
agree.
I think the point I've always tried to make is that those decisions really need to be state decisions as opposed to FirstNet. I would like to see FirstNet set the bar as broadly as possible, and then allow the states to decide more specifically who we want on the network and who we want not on the network. And you know, we can also, through prioritization, actually manage that more effectively too. But like you say, we got to have the policies and the and the procedures in place and,
Because you're just gonna end up with another clogged pipeline.
yes,
Right.
right.
And then we'll have a new card that we have to dial in to get in the FirstNet.
Well, and I think technology will help answer some of those questions.
Yes.
Do we have the technology to be able to say, hey, those secondary users that are lower in the totem pole, can we easily push them down, throttle them back, or push them off?
Right.
So that those that higher up can make sure they haul it as access, because if we're all competing for the same pipeline,
Well, and you may be able to restrict it through the use of applications. So in other words, yes, they can have the devices, yes, they can have constant functionality, but it's only under a certain set of circumstances. So in other words, if I'm PG&E, I'm not gonna shift all of my data and communication operations to this new device and this
right.
new network. Instead, I have a device, it will work on my usual network 98% of the time, but by pushing this button or entering into this app, I've
There's a
now
specific
kicked over,
app
yeah,
Yes.
just for
I've now
CAN
kicked over to
class 14.
FirstNet
Yep.
and I can
Yep.
play.
That
Yep.
could work.
That makes
Yep.
a lot more
Yeah.
sense.
Yep,
You're right.
that does make sense.
Yep.
Cool.
And I also like Chief's idea here about, it is, a lot of this is gonna be incident driven,
Mhm.
right? I mean, you're gonna have a baseline ability to utilize the network. However, when a major incident happens, those people in the vicinity, those agencies that are in the vicinity of said incident are gonna hopefully be coordinating and be under the control either of an area command or incident command or something like that, in which case a cache of devices and/or agencies that are enabled at that point
Mhm.
might be another model to look at. It's
Mhm.
like we'll flip on BART, we'll flip on the, Durham transportation or
Mhm.
whatever it is
Mhm.
at that point. So I think
Yep.
there's some definite discussions need to be had.
Yep.
on this.
Well, and as we look at that, then the subscriber fees will be constant, even though we might just be flipping this off and on. So, I mean, there's a lot that will have to be worked out, and I think we won't know the extent of it until the RFP is awarded.
But I think the concern about sustainability, funding sustainability versus functionality, if the end game is functionality in an emergency incident, or is the end game sustainability as far as funding? Because at some point, you're gonna have to give one to get the other. If we water it down, then there's so many people that are subscribing and available to
Yep.
use the system,
Yep.
so.
But then without sustainability, you don't have a network.
That's right.
It's the chicken or the egg.
Either way.
Absolutely.
So that's when you start looking at, some kind of a user fee for, say, cell phones.
Mhm.
That would, we've got the 911 fee attached to, to all phones to support the 911 system. Perhaps this is something that should be investigated for, a statewide application to help support the public safety broadband network.
It's just interesting, the whole thing. And we'll see how, as the RFP progresses, and then go from there. Okay,
Yeah,
Rob?
Karen, Karen, one thought I had on that is, how do you filter, that definition to be inclusive, and broad, but, only get the right people when you need them at the right time? And, going back to the whole ICS structure, the NIMS and SEMS
Yep.
programs, I mean, I would expect that anybody that's on a FirstNet phone, that you run the filter of, have they been NIMS, trained and, ICS, and are they part of a CERT program or whatever it's going to be, right? So you can kind of qualify the users, on the system. They know how to operate in that situation following those protocols, so.
Which goes back to some sort of validation of who the users are before they can get on the network.
Right.
Yep.
Which
So when
goes
it comes
back
to,
to
like,
a
campus
policy
security,
and a governance of who's gonna get, approval.
Yes.
Can you
Yep.
link it to like
I know, it's a circle.
Here we started.
It all comes back to us, I think.
I think it
Yeah,
does.
this is right back where we
Yes,
started.
we started where we
Well
ended.
played. Must be time for lunch.
And then Rob has,
Yeah, can I just say?
absolutely.
he's gonna solve it all for us.
No, I'm not. I just wanted to say we've recently published an updated data set on the interactive map at the PUC, and the mobile coverage using our standard of 6 megabits per second down and 1.5 megabits per second up. We've adjusted how we represent that on the map based on reliability. When we look at the mean speed, the average speed, the coverage at 6 1.5 for the whole state, the population is about 98%. We've adjusted that down so that we have a higher likelihood of getting that 6.1.5. So what we've done is subtracted out 2 standard deviations. Currently, it's 2 standard deviations, the population coverage is about 16%. So there's a huge drop in coverage. So when we talk about coverage maps, I just want to impress upon the board and maybe help set expectations about what coverage means, because you can't have coverage without a service level definition. So think about this. In San Francisco, you could probably get high-speed streaming video. When you go out to MODOC, you might only have voice. So if you're thinking about having, connection to a hospital during an incident, that may not be a reality. And it's not so much because of the radio, it's because of the backhaul. We're seeing 2 to 3 times as many drop packets in the rural just because of the backhaul. It doesn't have to do with the radio at all.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point, because one of the things that we find when we look at the coverage objectives and the designs and the way that the LTE works is that capacity is really the thing that's being addressed in the metropolitan areas and the highly urbanized and populated areas, but in the rural areas it's about coverage but lower capacity. So on the network, you can get a connection, but it's going to be slow potentially, right, because of its location.
Yeah, we are all nodding our heads, yes. Absolutely. Okay, so was there any other comments from folks here? Okay, so our next meeting, we'll send out a schedule. I like to continue about every other month, but we'll see how things go, because I also think it might get kind of quiet during the RFP process. But if we're working on the the CTT and the workshops, it could also be very busy. So probably the next meeting in February? No? Yes, in February? And then we'll go from there. Okay. Meeting is adjourned.